Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. On the third day of this administration, January 23rd, 2021, the White House sent an email to Twitter. The email said this: wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP, in all caps. That third day, what did that tweet say? Tweet from Mr. Kennedy said this: Hank Aaron's tragic death is part of a wave of suspicious deaths among elderly closely following administration of the vaccine. He received the vaccine on January 5th to inspire other Black Americans to get the vaccine. Now, what's interesting about the email that the White House sent to Twitter is the subject line says, flagging Hank Aaron misinformation. Now, misinformation is when you don't have the facts right. You're saying things that aren't true. But when you look at Mr. Kennedy's tweet, there was nothing in there that was factually inaccurate. Hank Aaron, real person, great American, passed away after he got the vaccine, pointing out facts. And yet the White House on the third day was trying, actually 1:04 a.m. on January 23rd, 2021, 37 hours into the administration, they were trying to censor Mr. Kennedy. I find that interesting, the irony here, trying to censor the guy who's actually their Democrat primary opponent. Go figure. 3 months earlier, the FBI helped censor our second witness, Miss Morris's story. Her story in the New York Post about emails on the Hunter Biden laptop. And we know the FBI censored her because of work this committee has done to uncover what happened, and because of our third witness, Mr. Sauer, the lawsuit that he argued on behalf of Louisiana and Missouri in federal court, in a case that they got the amazing ruling from on July 4th, just 2 weeks ago. You go back to, in the course of that investigation, course of that lawsuit from Missouri and Louisiana, Yoel Roth, former head of site integrity at Twitter, in his sworn declarations, it's brought out in that lawsuit, in his sworn declaration in front of the Federal Elections Commission, he said this: during weekly meetings, federal law enforcement agencies communicated that they expected hack and leak operations before the 2020 presidential election, likely in October. These expectations were discussed throughout 2020. I also learned in these meetings that a hack and leak operation would involve Hunter Biden. Now think about it. Weekly meetings throughout 2020, hack and leak operation in October involving Hunter Biden. 5 key things they pointed out throughout that year. And guess what? It all happens. It happens just like they predicted. How did they know? How did they know it was going to happen like that? Because they had the laptop. They had the laptop for 10 months before Mrs. Morris's story on October 14th. Her story breaks that day. That same day, October 14th, 2020, Twitter meets with the FBI, specifically the Foreign Influence Task Force at the FBI. Later that same day, again, the day her story comes out, Facebook also meets with the FBI. The head of the Foreign Influence Task Force now is Laura Demlow, and this committee interviewed her just 3 days ago. And what an interesting interview that was. We asked her about these meetings. She stated in the first meeting, the FBI and Twitter, in that first meeting, she said someone from Twitter asked, is the laptop real? They asked the fundamental question. That story broke, it was big news. Twitter asked the FBI, they're right there in front of them. They've been prepping them for a year. They asked the FBI, is the laptop real? Ms. Demlow conveyed to the committee this week, an FBI agent answered, yes, it is. Another FBI agent, a lawyer, very quickly followed up with no further comment. So again, here's the scenario. The story breaks. Twitter's meeting with FBI later that same day. Someone from Twitter asks, is this story real? Is the laptop real? The FBI answers yes, and then quickly followed by, again, all this conveyed by Ms. Demlow, the FBI lawyer says no further comment. In the later meeting with Facebook, again that same day, the FBI was asked the same question, and this time, the FBI gets their story straight. Ms. Demlow is the only one who comments, and she says no comment. Obviously, by the second meeting, the FBI had coordinated, and she conveyed this in her deposition, that they had deliberated what they were going to respond when that question was asked. So think about this. After being repeatedly told a hack and leak Russian info operation is coming for a whole year, it arrives on October 14th in the form of Ms. Morris's story, an accurate story. Our government knows the laptop is real. They know it's not a Russian information op, and they know the story is true. But when directly asked, they say no comment. And of course, Ms. Morris's story is censored. Visibility filtered, the term that the tech companies use. No, you can't direct message, you can't send it. Keeping the American people from valuable information just days before the most important election we have, election for commander-in-chief, election for the presidency of the United States. That's why Ms. Morris is here today. She knows what it's like to be censored. It's why Louisiana and Missouri filed the case. It's why Mr. Sauer argued the case. And frankly, it's why Mr. Kennedy is running for president. It's to stop. Help us expose and stop what's going on. This alliance, big government pressuring private entities to censor Americans. I think in Ms. Morris's testimony, which I read this morning, big tech, big government working together, big media working all together to censor American speech. So we look forward to your testimony over the next few hours. But I will tell you this, just get ready. I think these guys, Ms. Morris, get ready. Last time we had a journalist sitting there, they were trying to get them to divulge their sources. So be ready, but I know you can handle it. We appreciate your willingness to come forward. We appreciate your willingness to fight for the First Amendment. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
But why are we here? Why? You know, that's been the question that quite a number of people have been asking me. Why are you having this hearing? What does this have to do with inflation? What does this have to do with the cost of living? What does this have to do with the everyday lives of Americans, the thing that the Republican Party said that they would focus on if they had control of the House? Why would the Republican leadership and the committee majority give a hearing and a platform to the witnesses today, specifically to Mr. Kennedy, a man who has recently claimed that COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people? The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. And before that, in his film, Medical Racism, The New Apartheid, that film stated that COVID-19 vaccines do not work for Black children because of their, quote, kick-ass kind of immune system, that hyper, superhuman, subhuman kind of language. He also said, even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland. You could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did, to imply Jews in Nazi Germany had more freedoms than unvaccinated Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, many of my Republican colleagues across the dais will rush to cover that they have Mr. Kennedy here because they want to protect his free speech, that they do not believe in American censorship. This is not the kind of free speech that I know of, the free speech that is protected by the Constitution's First Amendment. But free speech is not an absolute. The Supreme Court has stated that. And others' free speech that is allowed, hateful, abusive rhetoric, does not need to be promoted in the halls of the people's house. This Republican charge of free speech is being used by Republican members to promote quasi-science, things such as the replacement theory that says that brown people are replacing good white Americans here in this country. Let's not remember that this country first belonged to brown Native American people. It's a rallying cry for bigotry and hate. There are members of the Republican conference who also frequently suggest that Americans have to deal with COVID rules as the same as oppression of Nazi Germany. Indeed, some have even questioned whether the Holocaust took place. We have staffers who openly follow white supremacy without any condemnation of the Republican conference. Some give it chuckles, slaps on the back, shrugs, all under the mantra of free speech. It's a free country. You absolutely have a right to say what you believe, but you don't have the right to a platform, public or private, We don't have to give one of the largest platforms of our democracy, Congress, this hearing. Our right does not mean that we as Americans are not free from accountability. And that's what's distressing about this hearing. Even knowing what they know about Mr. Kennedy's hateful, evidence-free rhetoric, and even though they've invited any number of witnesses to make their point, Speaker McCarthy, Chairman Jordan affirmatively chose to give this a platform. They intentionally chose to elevate this rhetoric to give these harmful, dangerous views a platform in the halls of the United States Congress. That's endorsing that speech. That's not just supporting free speech. They have co-signed on idiotic, bigoted messaging. It's a conscious choice. There's no doubt as to why they're making the choice. It's not to guard free speech or to ensure equality for all. All of this, as you'll hear throughout this hearing, is to show us by their conduct over and over and again that any attack on Joe Biden to get Donald Trump back in the White House is what they need to do. They think that by hurting the Biden administration, by putting Mr. Kennedy on display, they have said that he's only running for censorship. I think people run for the President of the United States because they want to advance the American people. Over the last 8 months, the extreme MAGA majority has spent its time, not to mention tons of taxpayer money, something that they're always so cautious about, on baseless investigations that have gone nowhere, all in an effort to serve as a legislative arm of the Trump campaign and discredit any agency that dares to hold the president or those that work with him or who have the same ideals that he has accountable for those that are such as white supremacy, such as election deniers, such as inciters, and those who engaged in the riots of January 6th. Truth be told, I have no idea whether the chairman actually believes any of the stuff. I don't. It's not a question I've asked him or one that's necessarily even important. But it's clear that one aim of his investigation is to bully tech and media companies into turning a blind eye to right-wing extremist conspiracies, from QAnon to the Great Replacement theory, as they spread across their platforms, even when those theories violate very basic terms of service about deliberate disinformation and promoting violence. Let's not even think about what happens in 2024 with Russian trolls, Iran, China trying to interfere in our elections. If MAGA Republicans agree with you, you're given a platform to spread any conspiracy theories, no matter how harmful. And if they disagree with you, you get death threats until you have to go away. These folks have a plan. They want to force social media companies to promote conspiracy theories because they think that's the only way their candidate can win the 2024 election. They want to bully the experts into abandoning their work on disinformation to pave the way. They want to give expression to the most vile sorts of speech here in this committee room because it prepares the ground for their own conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. And they apparently don't care how many people are hurt or die as a consequence of their actions, either through lies about vaccines or threats to the safety of witnesses, because nothing is more important to them than power. It's a free country. Both Chairman Jordan and Mr. Kennedy are free to say whatever they want. It's the chairman's right to promote any of the views he wants to promote. But that freedom doesn't mean that the rest of us can't see what they're doing and demand something better from our representatives, from my colleagues, from this Congress. Be better than the witnesses, my colleagues. Let's be better. Let's get about the business, the real business of the American people, and stop the division, the divisiveness that is being promoted through this committee. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record from page 29 of Ms. Demelow's testimony from 3 days ago. Question, do you recall whether any of these social media companies you were meeting with asked you any questions about the laptop story? I do was her answer. And what is your recollection? Somebody from Twitter essentially asked whether the laptop was real, and one of the FBI folks who was on the call did confirm that, quote, yes, it was, before another participant jumped in and said no further comment. Question, do you recall who from the FBI said it was real? I do. And who was that person? I'll have to get back with you. Without objection, we'll enter that into the record. We now want to introduce our witnesses. I want to start with Ms. Emma Jo Morris. Ms. Morris is politics editor at Breitbart News. She previously served as the deputy politics editor at the New York Post, where she authored the Post coverage of the Hunter Biden laptop and its contents in 2020. Ms. Maya Wiley is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. She previously served as counsel to New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and at the American Civil Liberties Union and the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. We welcome you as well, Ms. Wiley. Mr. John Sauer is the Special Assistant Attorney General for the Louisiana Department of Justice, and he is one of the lead lawyers in the Missouri v. Biden case that I referenced in my opening statement. He previously served as Deputy Attorney General for Special Litigation with the Missouri Attorney General's Office and Solicitor General of Missouri. He clerked for Judge Michael Ludig and Justice Antonin Scalia. And then our final witness is Mr. Kennedy. I will turn to our colleague, Mr. Roy, member of the Judiciary Committee, and waved on to the subcommittee to introduce Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Chairman. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the son of a former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and the nephew of America's 35th President, John F. Kennedy. The third of 11 children, he graduated from Harvard University. We won't hold that against him because he went on to receive his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law, my alma mater, as an undergraduate. Some viewing Mr. Kennedy through his last name, but that does a tremendous disservice to his life's work, whether you agree with it or not. Out of law school, Mr. Kennedy built his career as an environmental lawyer, representing New York City environmentalists and environmentalists across the globe in numerous legal battles. His work culminated in the landmark New York City Watershed Agreement focused on the cleaning of New York City's waterways. After the 2008 election, Politico reported that President-elect Obama strongly considered Mr. Kennedy to head the Environmental Protection Agency. He went on to found Children's Health Defense, a national organization intended to address childhood chronic disease and toxic exposures. I assume that being a father of 7, in addition to being one of 11 children himself, fuels his interest in children's health. Following the 2016 election, Mr. Kennedy met with then President-elect Trump to discuss his potential for a committee to examine vaccine safety and scientific integrity. Their conversation also touched on the CDC and ways to increase independence from financial conflicts. Most recently, Mr. Kennedy announced his campaign for President of the United States. During his campaign announcement, he stated, quote, "My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign and throughout my presidency will be to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is threatening to impose a new kind of corporate feudalism in our country," end quote. It is for this that Mr. Kennedy finds himself receiving the scorn of both the political left and right. Because if one dares challenge the orthodoxy of the powers that be, then one is their enemy. As a graduate of the University of Virginia, Mr. Kennedy no doubt knows the following quote, For here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead. Thomas Jefferson. That truism was lost during the COVID pandemic. Individuals receiving scorn simply for asking questions. People being silenced for challenging the status quo. These are the kinds of questions that should have been publicly debated, and this hearing is focused on that truth, and we welcome Mr. Kennedy.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Kennedy. We're glad you were here. We will now proceed with open statement. Before I do, I want to introduce the guy sitting behind you, Mr. Kennedy, who was a former colleague of ours, and maybe more importantly for me, a good friend of mine, Dennis Kucinich, who served in the United States Congress for 14 years, I believe, and great Buckeye. So we welcome Dennis, and I know Elizabeth's here as well, and we appreciate your service, Dennis, and your commitment to the First Amendment. We'll now go with opening testimony. Mr. Kennedy, you are recognized for your opening statement. As mine's not. Make sure it's on.
Mr. Chairman, are you going to swear in the witnesses?
If you'll please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Kennedy, you are now recognized for your opening statement, and then we'll go right down the line. He's going to go a little longer.
Excuse me, point of order. I know that witnesses usually have 5 minutes. I see 10 minutes on the board. Is it going to be 10 minutes
We'll
for
give him
every
5 minutes,
witness?
but we're pretty lax with this. We'll let him go for.
We are?
Yeah.
I've seen you gavel down on quite a number of witnesses.
Given senators and former Democrat members of Congress and all kinds
He's
of folks.
neither.
time.
He's neither.
I'm just saying in past history.
Okay,
in the
okay.
committee. But
Let's just
we'll
watch
give
the
you,
time for all the witnesses.
and if
then.
you want to cut him off and censor him some more, you're welcome to do it.
Oh, that's not my job. That's your job. Why don't you threaten a witness so that they can not want to be a witness?
Mr. Kennedy is recognized for his opening statement. We'll give him 5 minutes, more or less, and then we'll move to the next one. Mr. Kennedy, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we could put 5 minutes on the clock then, not 10.
Could we put 5 on the clock and start it running?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to put aside my written statement for a moment and address one of the points that was brought up. I think an important point by the ranking member, that this body ought to be concerning itself with the issues that impact directly the American people. The rising price of groceries, 76% over the past 2 years for basic foodstuff, the war in Ukraine, the inflation issues, the border issues, many, many other issues that concern us all as a nation. We can't do that without the First Amendment, without debate. When I gave my speech, my announcement speech in Boston 2 months ago, YouTube, I talked about all those issues. I focused on grocery. I focused on the fact that working class people can no longer afford to live in this country. I talked about inflation, all the issues that deeply concern you, and that you've devoted your career to alleviating those issues. 5 minutes into my speech, when I was talking about Paul Revere, YouTube deplatformed me. I didn't talk about vaccines in that speech. I didn't talk about anything that was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and things, the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. There's 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. And I was censored not just by the Democratic administration, I was censored by the Trump administration. I was the first person censored by as the chairman pointed out, by the Biden administration 2 days after it came into office. It ordered a truthful, and by the way, they had to invent a new word called malinformation to censor people like me. There was no misinformation on my Instagram account. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced to peer-reviewed publications or government databases. Nobody has ever pointed to a single piece of misinformation that I published. I was removed for something they called malinformation. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government, that they don't want people to hear. And that's antithetical to the values of our country. After I announced my presidency, it became more difficult for people to censor me outright. So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, where people apply pejoratives like anti-vax. I've never been anti-vaccine, but everybody in this room probably believes that I have been, because that's the prevailing narrative. Anti-Semitism, racism, these are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me, because people don't want me to have that conversation about the war, about groceries, about inflation, about the war on the middle class in this country that we need to be having. And by the way, I want to say this while I'm on the record, that in my entire life, and why I'm under oath, in my entire life, I have never uttered a phrase that was either racist or anti-Semitic. I have spent my life fighting my professional career, fighting for Israel, for the protection of Israel. I have a better record on Israel than anybody in this chamber today. I'm the only person who has publicly objected to the $2 billion payout that the Biden administration is now making to Iran, which is a genocidal program. I'm the only one who's objected to that. I've fought more ferociously for Israel than anybody. But I am being censored here through this target, through smears, through misinterpretations of what I've said, through lies, through association, which is a tactic that we all thought we had been discredited and dispensed with after the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s. But those same weapons are now being deployed against me to silence me. I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic. I do not believe that. There is no evidence of that. I want to say something I think that's more important, and it goes directly to what you talked about, ranking member, which is the need, this toxic polarization that is destroying our country today. And how do we deal with that? This kind of division is more dangerous for our country than any time since the American Civil War. And how do we deal with that? How are we going to, every Democrat on this committee believes that we need to end that polarization. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We need to start being kind to each other. We need to start being respectful to each other. We need to start restoring the comedy to this chamber and to the rest of America, but it has to start here. My uncle, Edward Kennedy, has more legislation with his name on it than any senator in United States history. Why is that? Because he was able to reach across the aisle, because he didn't deal in insults, because he didn't try to censor people. He brought home people who were antithetical to what he believed in. He came home almost every weekend with people like Orrin Hatch to our house at the compound in Hyannisport. At that time, Orrin Hatch to me was like Darth Vader, because I was an environmentalist. And I was saying, why is Teddy bringing this guy home? But he knew that he was effective because he understood that comedy and respect and kindness and compassion and empathy for other people is the way that we have, the only way to restore the function in this chamber. But more importantly, today we need to give an example in the leadership of our country of being respectful to each other. If you think I said something that's anti-Semitic, let's talk about the details. I'm telling you all the things that I'm accused of right now by you And in this letter are distortions, they're misrepresentations. I didn't say those things. There's fragments that I said, but I denounce anybody who uses the words that I have said to imply something that is negative about people who are Jewish. I never said those things. And I want to point out also that the chairman pointed to Dennis Kucinich, who's fighting behind me. There is no two people in the country who feel more differently about American politics than these two people, and yet they were friends. Dennis attended his children's basketball games, attended his daughter's wedding. This is what we need, how we need to start treating each other in this country. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify, to gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order.
Gentlelady can state a point of order.
Point of order pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, which Mr. Kennedy is violative of. I move that we remove into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week. Rule 11, Clause 2 says, whenever it is asserted by a member of the committee that the evidence or testimony at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate any person, or it is asserted by a witness that the evidence or testimony that the witness would give at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate the witness, and it goes on. Mr. Kennedy, among many other things, has said, I know a lot now about bioweapons. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there is an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are...
Lady making a motion or a speech?
I've made a motion to move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy's testimony...
Mr. Chairman, I move to table the motion.
The gentleman from Kentucky has moved to table.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a roll call vote on the motion to table.
Well, let me ask the question. The question is on the motion to table. The gentlelady has asked for a roll call vote. The clerk will have to step back for a second. The clerk will have to come in. We'll call the roll on the motion to table, and then we can get back to testimony. Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 10 ayes and 8 noes.
The motion to table is agreed to. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes. And I think we'll do ranking member and one more, and then we'll have to take a break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we talked earlier about a post that Mr. Kennedy had at the beginning of the Biden administration. I just want the record to reflect that that post has not been taken down. So I'm wondering about the extent of censorship when the post is still there. But more importantly, again, I go back to just the fact that we are creating a platform for this kind of discussion, not about the censorship, not about free speech, but the content of some of that speech that we are amplifying in this room. I'm appalled and just so troubled by colleagues that I have to work with, that these are individuals who would bring a witness who's promoted a video that compared the COVID vaccine to the Tuskegee trials. The Tuskegee trials were a very difficult time in Black America where individuals who were already sick with a disease were then reviewed, experimented on who already had a disease to see how far that disease went. And making the comparison that manipulates and preys on Black people's feelings about the atrocities of the past in order to prevent them from seeking life-saving vaccines in the present. And knowing that this is dangerous, I cannot also be unaware that this comes from an individual who, by Mr. Roy's introduction, is very smart and understands the implications of this. You know, Mr. Kennedy's own family decries his stance on vaccines, and families disagree on a lot of things. I got family members that, we all disagree. So that doesn't mean anything. But the fact that he has famously sent a request to a party guest that they had to be vaccinated to come to his party. And I'd like to introduce into the record a letter from Louis Silkin, a law firm representing Mr. Kennedy, which states, as he has stated repeatedly, he vaccinated all his children, and I'd like that to be introduced into the record, but tells the Black community and myself, a mother of 5 Black children, that I should really be careful and not necessarily have the same safeguards to protect my family, my children, from a virus that has killed millions of people because I'm Black. There's no secret that this is an amplification of his own platform. I'm not going to talk about the money that's received from the Children's Health Defense, from his anti-vaccine organization that's responsible for a majority of the false information out there about COVID, and the notoriety that's gained from it by manipulating Black and other vulnerable communities to propagate these pseudosciences.
Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to yield my time to Representative Massey.
I thank the gentleman from North Dakota. Wow, the irony and cognitive dissonance from the other side of the aisle, it's deafening. You could cut it with a knife. They are at the same time denying that censorship is occurring, but suggesting that there's more material that needs to be censored. This is a hearing on censorship that began with an effort, with a formal motion from the other side of the aisle to censor Mr. Kennedy. They do not want him to speak, yet that is the topic of this hearing. They have kept him from speaking. A collusion between the government and private organizations. Mr. Kennedy, in your opening statement, you introduced us to this word malinformation. Can you tell us more about this made-up word, what it means, and some of the things that you've said or tried to say that you've been censored for that's been characterized as malinformation?
Yes, Congressman Massey, and if by your leave, I'd like to just respond very briefly to some of the, what I would call defamations that have been just applied to me by the ranking member. I'm happy to talk to you about my opinions on these issues, what you have stated and tried to associate me with through guilt by association is simply inaccurate. Virtually everything, every statement that you just made about me is inaccurate. I have never advised Black Americans not to receive vaccines. At one point you say I'm anti-vax, and that's a bad thing. The other moment you point out that all my children are vaxxed. I'm fully compliant with the vaccine schedule myself, except for COVID. I took flu vaccines for 20 years straight. I have never been anti-vax. I have never told the public avoid vaccination. The only thing I've asked for, and my views are constantly misrepresented, so that the truth of what I believe is not, we're not allowed to have a conversation about that with the American people, which I believe vaccines should be tested with the same rigor as other medicines and medications. You tried to associate me a moment ago with the replacement theory, which is racist.
No, I did not say you had the replacement theory. I said my colleagues.
Time belongs to the gentleman from...
I denounce that theory. It is racist, and I have never endorsed it or had any association with it. Our film on a medical... By the way, Bill Buxton, who is the Black CDC official who ultimately exposed the Tuskegee experiment, tried for years and years to appeal to CDC to stop it for 40 years. Finally, he got relief by walking into my uncle's office in the building next door. Teddy held hearings and ended the experiment. I remember that very well. And to say that I created a film that encourages Blacks not to get adequate medical care is just completely abhorrent.
Don't misuse my
It's
words,
the
sir.
witness's time. Do not censor the witness.
I'm
If
not
the-
censoring
if
the
the-
witness.
if
I'm not
the-
censoring the witness. He's still
If
talking.
it is
I don't
it's my
have the
time and I've
ability to
given it to
censor.
the witness, do not censor him.
I'm not
If-
censoring him.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, I've attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, ranking member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks. And answer very quickly to your question, the term malinformation was coined to describe information that Facebook and Twitter and the other social media sites understood was true, but that the White House and other federal agencies wanted censored anyway for political reasons because it challenged official orthodoxies. I'll give you one example. I was included in a group called the Disinformation Dozen. And Facebook and others were asked to censor us, which they did. And by the way, my Heck Aaron post, it was taken down. My whole Instagram account with 900,000 people was taken down because of that. Oh, they knew, Facebook knew that the Disinformation Dozen claim, and what they said, if the Disinformation Dozen came from this very shady group called the Center for Preventing Digital Hate in England, that's funded by dark money, that should be looked into. They claim that 65% of the vaccine misinformation on the internet was generated by those 12 people. Facebook itself said that is impossible. That is false information. We know that not to be true. And yet, when the White House asked them to censor this Disinformation Dozen, including me, they did it anyway when they knew it to be untrue.
My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Yield to Mr. Roy.
Mr. Roy is recognized for 5
I
minutes.
thank the gentleman from Florida. I thank the chairman. Mr. Kennedy, first of all, your father served as the Attorney General of the United States. I'm a former Assistant United States Attorney. Do you believe that it is a proper function and role for Congress and for all of us to question whoever happens to be in the seat at the office of the Attorney General or in the FBI or in upper levels of government generally to seek the truth, wherever it may lead?
Make sure your mic's on.
Your microphone.
That is exactly the function that the United States Constitution assigned to the people to the members of Congress. And I would say this: I don't want President Trump misusing the FBI, and I don't want President Biden. None of us should want anybody.
Amen. And I agree with that completely. Let me characterize my understanding of something, get your perspective on it. Following the 2016 election, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, Peter Marks met with you, to the best of my understanding, regarding vaccine safety, in part as a result of your engagement with President Trump. And at that meeting, you requested evidence of a vaccine undergoing placebo-controlled trial safety tests prior to licensing. After making a show of looking for the document, Dr. Fauci informed you, to the best of my understanding, that the document was back in Bethesda and that he would eventually send the document to you. The document, to the best of my knowledge, was never sent, and that you sued HHS for documents showing and trying to figure out the truth of the matter, and that you found that not one study was done on pre-licensing safety testing for COVID vaccines. After a year, HHS finally sent you a letter stating, we don't have any. This means, to the best of my understanding, that nobody knows the risk profiles for these products or whether they avert more harm than they cause. And as a result, there's no real science behind these statements, but rather guesswork. Is that a fair characterization of what you've experienced?
That is a fair characterization. We had looked for many years to find a pre-licensing safety trial of any of the 72 vaccines doses that are now essentially mandated. They're recommended, but that's effectively mandated for American children, and we have not been able to find any. And every other medication requires, prior to licensing by FDA, that the company perform a safety trial that compares health outcomes in a placebo group and a similarly situated vaccine group. My assumption was that was done for vaccines. We found out that it hadn't been, that it was not, they were exempt. And I made that statement publicly. Dr. Fauci contradicted me, and when President Trump ordered him to meet with me, him and Francis Collins and a group of my colleagues, I said to them at that time, you've said publicly that I've been dishonest about that. Can you show us a single pre-licensing safety trial, placebo-controlled safety trial for any of the 72 vaccines required for American children? And he made that show of looking through a file, and he said, well, they're back in Bethesda. And I said, will you send them to me? And I never heard from him again, so we sued the HHS under the Freedom of Information Law. After a year of litigation, they sent us a letter which is posted on CHD's website that acknowledges that they are now not able to locate a single pre-licensing safety trial, placebo-controlled for any of the vaccines that are now mandated for children. These are zero liability vaccines.
And so if I might interject in just limited time, and I hope you can expand on that further. I know my friend from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, will probably expand on this later, but your uncle, Senator Ted Kennedy, was a pretty strong opponent of sweeping immunity from liability for manufacturers of vaccines. And did he not introduce an amendment to repeal the so-called PrEP Act, the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, when he was a senator?
Yes, he did. And, the immunity which was passed in 1986, neither the Republicans or Democrats wanted it. Ronald Reagan at that time, who signed the bill, said, and Wyeth was the company that was pushing it, and they were saying that they were losing $20 in downstream liabilities for every dollar that they made in profits from vaccines. They were going to get out of the business if they were not granted immunity. Ronald Reagan said to them at that time, why don't you make the vaccines safe? And Wyatt said, because they're unavoidably unsafe, which is true of most medicines. I'm not anti-vaccine, but I think we need to be honest and we need to have good science. That's all I've ever argued.
And closing out my time here, I would just say this. My father had polio. I understand the ravages of that disease. I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to have the polio vaccine, but I also want the truth being sought. I want to know the health impacts of the polio vaccine going forward and every other vaccine that's being administered. And I'll just close by saying and asking, I know that this is informed by a great deal of conversations you've had with mothers and moms who came up to you. And if you could expand on that, I'll yield back.
Yeah, I mean, I was dragged kicking and screaming into this space because I was confronted by, when I was touring the country on suing companies about mercury and fish. And by the way, people, I spent 30 years trying to get mercury out of the fish in this country, and nobody ever called me anti-fish. At that time, we were trying to get mercury out of vaccines because mothers were coming and saying, my child was injured by the vaccine. These were many, many hundreds, literally, of mothers with intellectual disabilities. And they said, nobody's listening to us. The Democrats aren't listening to us. Republicans aren't listening to us, and I felt like I should listen to them and actually read the science, and that is what got me down into the time. And by the way, it's the worst career decision I have ever made.
Time of the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. You'll back.
Time of the gentleman expired. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Plaskett. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, anti-Asian hate and violence skyrocketed as some racists blamed a virus coming out of China on all Asian Americans. Since March of 2020, Stop AAPI Hate, a nonprofit organization aimed at tracking and addressing anti-Asian hate, reported more than 11,000 anti-Asian acts of hate and violence. This same report found that 49% of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have experienced some form of discrimination. These acts of hate include Asian Americans being beaten, spit on, screamed at, and even killed. And the increases in these types of attacks during COVID accompanied a slew of anti-Chinese sentiments related to the virus, like calling it the quote-unquote China virus and even disgustingly quote-unquote Kung flu. Many Asian Americans were harassed, physically accosted, and told that they quote-unquote created the virus. Yet one of our Republican witnesses encourages this appalling rhetoric and promotes anti-Asian hate with dangerous and unfounded claims. Just last week, Mr. Kennedy suggested COVID-19 was a bioweapon and said it was, quote, targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people, end quote, and that, quote, the people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese, end quote, suggesting that the Chinese people didn't suffer like others during the pandemic. Despite asserting that he should become their president, Mr. Kennedy seems to disregard the correlation between anti-Asian rhetoric and violence. Ms. Wiley, do you frequently work with minority communities, including Chinese American or other Asian American communities?
I do.
And do you think Mr. Kennedy's theory is racist?
I think that Mr. Kennedy's statements fuels the theories that suggest that there's a biology to race, and that therefore we can actually identify people in communities as possibly either being benefited by or being people who are not sharing the same interests and needs as the rest of us. And yes, that has served to drive hate and bias, and sadly, including violent incidents.
Now, it was said earlier in this hearing that Mr. Kennedy is a smart man. Now, so far as I know, he does not have any specific education or training in medicine. He is not an epidemiologist, one who studies infectious diseases. He has never conducted clinical trials in a professional setting. He has never done scientific research in a professional laboratory and published scientific findings in a peer-reviewed publication. Ms. Wiley, what kind of harm does someone with absolutely no medical training or knowledge do when they espouse unfounded anti-Asian vaccine theories during a fraught time like COVID?
One of the things that happened in this historic pandemic was that there was certainly a need to get on top of very quickly what the science said. I am not a scientist either. And so what social media platforms did was go and speak to government agencies because their own policies, their own user agreements required them to look and figure out what the facts were so that they could assess what was responsible and what was not responsible to post.
We are not trying to censor speech. We are simply trying to create factually correct information to prevent harm to people, including death. And that's what they were trying to do during COVID. Is that not correct?
Legally speaking, absolutely. And I say that as a matter of law, which is that court cases say that the government has in fact, it's its role to ask for compliance with policies. The policies on the books of social media platforms were violated. And they
Excuse
said
me,
those...
Mr. Chairman, but the last questioner got an additional extra minute. I'm at 35 seconds over. I would just
Point of order,
ask that
Mr.
she
Chairman.
be
The
able to
Democrat beforehand got an extra minute.
her sentence.
Trying to be generous.
Finish her
Trying to
sentence.
be generous, even when the response is that the government determines the truth.
I
I'm trying
would
to be
like for
generous.
her to be able to finish her sentence, Mr. Chairman, then I will yield back.
Okay, Ms. Wiley, you can finish your sentence.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I remember the sentence, but thank you.
Okay.
I just think the point
I do. I do. You were saying
there's
the
a
government
record-
should be the arbiter
Can
of
you
what's
please
truth.
not put
That's
words into
actually-
the mouth of the witness and let her respond? It's
Chair now
her
recognizes the
answer.
gentlelady from New York, the gentlelady from California.
I love how you follow the rules, Mr. Chairman. It's really indicative of what a kangaroo court this is and what a circus it is.
by the chair. It's censorship by the chair.
Oh, Lord.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Kennedy, I want to turn to you. You've heard me lay out this example of egregious and illegal government censorship. You have been censored yourself. Do you believe that government censorship is a form of election interference?
I think democracy is dependent on the free flow of information. And if that information is distorted, if the public is lied to, then it interferes with election. And by the way, it interferes with public health. And the Wall Street Journal did an article a couple of weeks ago suggesting that the censorship of important health information cost American lives.
And Mr. Kennedy, I want to ask you specifically about the Hunter Biden laptop story. The total blackout on all social media outlets as well as telecom. You couldn't text the link to the Hunter Biden laptop story. This specifically was a form of election interference by the U.S. government in the 2020 election.
I don't know enough about it. I know that there was censorship on that story and other stories that, presumably could have changed people's minds about the election.
And we know the polling demonstrates that now. People have said they would have changed their vote had they been made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story. Isn't that correct?
I am not aware of that, but I'm not surprised.
Distortion of the truth has consequences. It's not censorship to try to correct that record. Vaccination denial would have cost millions of more lives in America. 1.1 million fellow Americans are dead today because of the pandemic. And millions are saved because of a vaccine that was developed in record time, and we ought to be celebrating that, not caviling about it. Protective measures were taken to take down disinformation about vaccines and about the nature of the virus and about protective measures we could take, including masks, including social distancing. It was not big brother government trying to exercise its will on an innocent population. It was public health measures to protect lives. Again, something should be celebrated. But no, there's an opportunity to have a conspiracy theory here. There's an opportunity to make political points. And no matter what you may think, Mr. Kennedy, and I revere your name, you're not here to propound your case for censorship. You are here for cynical reasons to be used politically by that side of the aisle to embarrass the current president of the United States, and you're an enabler in that effort today. And it brings shame on a storied name that I revere. I began my political interest with your father, and it makes me profoundly sad to see where we have descended today in this hearing.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Allred from Texas for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time to Ms. Plaskett.
I thank the gentleman from Texas. Mr. Kennedy's and others here are claiming that they've been censored, but they actually have a huge megaphone. The rules that my colleague tried to bring up are rules that the Republicans made at the beginning of this Congress. They did not allow the Democrats to be part of that, and one of those rules was that if information or testimony might potentially defame an individual, that we would go in executive session. No one was trying to stop him from testifying, but not to give him the megaphone that this group has allowed him to have. I also note, in terms of censorship, that the far-right media has already issued articles about me playing the race card. The race card is something that's often used against Black people for bringing up when they see race hatred being propagated against them. And it's a means to try and keep us quiet and keep us in our place. Oh, you're playing the race card by bringing up what is obvious in our lives, what is obviously happening, race. And so you can keep saying I'm race baiting and try and censor me, but I'm going to continue to tell the truth. I want to be abundantly clear about what else is happening in this room. The MAGA Republicans are trying to scare social media companies into not taking down blatantly false information in the lead up to our 2024 presidential election. Chair Jordan knows, as we do, that when conspiracy theories succeed, so does Donald Trump. Russia interfered in our 2016 election, they attempted in our 2020, and they're going to try to interfere in the 2024 presidential election. We note that Russian trolls sought to suppress the Black vote by unleashing a torrent of social media posts designed to stoke racial tensions and spread incorrect voting information. In 2021, our national intelligence agencies found that proactive information sharing between the government and social media companies facilitated the expeditious review and, in many cases, removal of social media accounts covertly operated by Russia and Iran. Ms. Wiley, if the government is not able to proactively share information with social media companies in 2024, what is likely to have be the ramifications? And I'd ask that you make your answer as succinct as possible because there's a lot of information I need.
I will just quote one thing. Mr. Prigozhin, who's been in the news of late, actually said explicitly and openly that they would continue to try to spread mis and disinformation into the United States and interfere with our elections.
Thank you. They know that Russian interference, that is, the MAGA Republicans know that Trump benefits when Russia interferes. The super PAC that supports, the same super PAC that supports Mr. Kennedy and has raised significant funds on his behalf is run by a man named Jason Bowles. Here's Jason Bowles' Twitter profile, as you can see up on the screen. Jason Bowles isn't just a MAGA supporter. He also ran the super PAC for MAGA Republicans Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, George Santos, and in 2022, he supported Herschel Walker. So the person behind Mr. Kennedy's super PAC is an individual who personally and professionally wants the Republican Party to succeed. Yet, Mr. Kennedy is running as a Democrat. Ms. Wiley, will it benefit Mr. Kennedy as well as the other individuals that are supported by the super PAC if social media companies are less able to detect and if needed, if they determine that it's needed, to remove Russian covert information designed to suppress votes in this country?
It is possible.
Thank you. I yield back.
Can I yield the remainder of the time?
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Stubbe from Florida for his 5 minutes.
Mr. Kennedy, do you want to respond to that? Can you do that quickly?
Yeah, I've never heard of Mr. Bowles, and I've never heard of that super PAC. This is typical of the accusations against me at this hearing. They are baseless, every single one. I've been subjected to a parade of defamations. If I believe those things about myself, I wouldn't want to hear me either. They'd want to gag me and lock me in a room somewhere. None of those are true, and they were all of this parade of accusations and defamations were made against me in a way that was calculated to make sure that I could not respond to any of them. Every one of them I'd like to respond to, but I was not allowed to.
Mr. Chair, I'd like the unanimous consent to enter into the record an article that states RFK Jr. Super PAC has deep ties to Marjorie Taylor Greene, George Santos, which discusses the super PAC titled Heal the Divide, which states that only Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can unite the nation and start healing America, and also discusses Mr. Kennedy's discussions with Mr. Trump about working in his administration.
Without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, I believe is that the cue?
Thank you.
Ms. Garcia, you recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A recent study found that nearly 2,000 lives could have been saved in Texas if it had reached the vaccination levels in places like Vermont or Connecticut. However, today, despite the horrific COVID-19 tragedies, and thank you for describing those refrigerated morgues, if you will, because that was horrible to even see, but I'm sure there's some deniers, just like that deny the climate that even happened. But these tragedies have also plagued rural South Texas and families all around the country. But yet we give a platform to one of the biggest spreaders of anti-vaccine propaganda in the country. He has claimed that vaccines have caused widespread death. They have not. He has claimed that vaccines are unsafe for pregnant people. They are not. He has claimed that vaccines cause autism. They do not. He has even suggested that vaccines implant government-controlled microchips into patients. They do not. As crazy as Mr. Kennedy's theories are, he has been able to effectively spread false medical information throughout our communities due to his prestigious family's name, his deep pockets, and his websites that publish patently false health and medical information. By inviting him here today, extreme MAGA Republicans elevate a man who tells others that vaccines aren't safe, but vaccines his own children for protection. And it was noted earlier, even asked guests to his party to be vaccinated. 3 billion lives were saved by the COVID-19 vaccine. And if anti-vaccine advocates like Mr. Kennedy did not continuously flood our communities with false health and medical information, more lives could have been saved.
But even Twitter's own analytics shows that it has elevated conservative speech, which, by the way, that shows and that research shows that while we're sitting here talking about this as if there is somehow a targeting of viewpoint, it's actually been about targeting whether or not the content is consistent with the policies of the platforms that they themselves set.
So this hearing really is literally putting even more lives at risk for elevating all these, what I think are crazy theories. Because as long as all these anti-vaccine theories are continue to spread, it makes people not only question the vaccine, but other vaccines. Would you agree?
I would, and I also want to say it also occurs in our democracy in terms of voting. Mis and disinformation about whether or not voting laws are being violated and whether individuals are violating them have led to death threats. That is also in violation of the social media policy.
The gentlelady has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Kamick.
Established clearly with hard evidence that there is in fact a weaponization of the federal government against the American people, and every single day that we do not acknowledge it is a bad day in America. The pillars of our constitutional republic, not democracy, are being taken down bit by bit because the press is being told they can't ask the tough questions. Ms. Morris, you have probably received threats, you have been censored, you have been silenced. Mr. Sauer, you have been before us many times and you have expressed the pushback, the threats that you have received. Mr. Kennedy, I can't imagine what you receive on a daily basis from both the left and the right. So I'm going to go to our Democratic colleague, Mr. Lynch, and ask the question, what impact does the continued narrative of weaponization have on the general public? I know he framed this in a way to make a point that it is somehow negative to ask the tough questions, but I'm going to ask our three witnesses here, what are the ramifications if we don't talk about it, if we don't expose it? And I only have 25 seconds, so Mr. Sauer, take it away.
If federal censorship is not stood up to aggressively, it will expand to every corner of online discourse.
Ms. Morris.
It's just this, I can't even believe this is a conversation. Like, this is not controversial or taboo. We live in the United States of America, and you have the right to say whatever you want, to print whatever you want, and to read whatever you want.
Mr. Kennedy.
A government that can censor its critics has license for every atrocity. It is the beginning of totalitarianism. There's never been a time in history when we look back and the guys who were censoring people were the good guys. All of us grew up reading Arthur Koestler, Robert Heinlein, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, and they were all saying the same thing. Once you start censoring, you're on your way to dystopia and totalitarianism.
And I know my time has expired, but Mr. Sauer, you said earlier, censorship is about power. Censorship is about control. And the entire progressive leftist agenda is about nothing more than dependency and control. That is why this is so important. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chair, before that, I have a document I'd like to enter into the record, a Washington Post article of July 23rd, which lists the misstatements of facts in the preliminary injunction in the Missouri v. Biden case that we've been talking about.
From what paper? What publication?
I said the Washington Post.
Okay.
Thank
Without
you.
objection. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sauer, welcome back to the committee. It's great to see you again. You're becoming a mainstay on the committee, and I do hope that you continue to update us on your case now that it has been stayed and will not be implemented as it goes through the appeals process. I'd like to quickly play a short video, if we could.
COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
Mr. Kennedy, I have a simple question for you as an early victim of COVID. I actually got it March 10th, 2020. And my question to you is whether you think I should be worried about my genetics as an Ashkenazi Jew because I did contract COVID.
No, not at all. And that statement that you saw there is a truncated version of a larger statement.
No, I understand. You issued a clarification.
Where I was describing,
I understand. Hold on. I had a simple question. You're now going on. I'm reclaiming my time. Because what I really want to talk about here is evidence. Evidence, evidence, evidence. Mr. Johnson was so eager to talk about what he called the hard evidence, and yet all we heard again was him repeating allegations without identifying any evidence. You can repeat all of these allegations as much as you want, but it doesn't make them true.
Well, gentlemen,
you are not witnesses. I don't have enough time, unfortunately. You are not witnesses to any of this conduct, and just because you say it over and over, it doesn't make it so. And if we're talking about censorship here, which I believe is presumably the reason why Mr. Kennedy is here, the tweet that you've identified was never taken down. Whatever the government may have tried to do, and I don't agree that it tried to do what you said it did, it wasn't taken down. So how can the government actually censor anyone if there's enough freedom within the companies they're talking to that they reject whatever request that the government makes?
The chair now recognizes himself. Hard evidence. Mr. Johnson said that we're not only witnesses to censorship, we were victims. The Republican website on the House Judiciary Committee posted the story, and it was limited where it could go. You got to. They exercise censorship of the House Judiciary Republican account, for goodness sake. Ms. Wiley, you were a lawyer for the ACLU?
I was.
Mr. Kennedy, I remember when the ACLU defended they were the champions of the First Amendment. You remember that? You remember that, ACLU?
I remember when the ACLU represented Nazis who they were appalled by.
Appalled, disgusted by, and yet they would defend the crazy things they said, right? That's how much the First Amendment meant to them, right?
Exactly.
I want to go back to where Mr. Stubbe was. I want to talk about this hard evidence that Mr. Goldman says doesn't exist. I want to read from the facts. This is what the White House was saying. I want to go to just 3 statements. One, cannot stress this is statements from the Biden White House to social media, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this account immediately. Same kind of thing they put on yours, remove ASAP. But here's the better one. Here's the better one. Mr. Flaherty, who ran this COVID operation misinformation concept at the White House, Mr. Flaherty said this, not to sound like a broken record, how much content is being demoted and how effective are you at mitigating reach and how quickly? And we should just translate that because this is real simple. How much censorship are you doing and how quickly are you doing it? But I think the kicker is what Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said back in 2021. Look at this. Now think about this. The press secretary, we're talking about the White House, considered the center of freedom on the planet. The press secretary in the press room says this: we are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation, their definition, of course. Psaki also stated one of the White House asks was of social media companies to create a robust enforcement strategy. So you got the press secretary in the press room in the White House saying we're going to limit the press. Now that is frightening. That is frightening. And Ms. Wiley from the ACLU, lawyer with the ACLU, thinks that's somehow appropriate. We know it's not. And their number one target, Mr. Kennedy, was you, a Democrat, their primary opponent. I find that amazing. And I would like any thoughts you may have on that, because here's the scary thing. And Dennis and I had this conversation a while back. If you don't have a robust First Amendment, if you try to restrict what the people say and what the press reports, that is a scary place to go. Because if you can't have debate and work out our differences, like you said in your amazing opening statement, let's work together, let's figure this out. But if you can't have that robust debate and figure things out, the alternative is scary. And that's exactly where we're headed. And I would encourage everyone to read Mr. Kennedy's written statement. I read it this morning. Amazing. He walks through the history here. That is what's at stake. And that's why what you're doing, whether we agree with what you say or not, and I disagree with what you said last week, what they played. I think a lot of people did. You've clarified it, but it's about protecting the Constitution and the First Amendment. I'll give you the last minute and a half, Mr. Kennedy.
Well, you know, what I would say is that the founders of our, and the framers of our Constitution knew that democracy was a very inefficient system, that it had all of these built-in inefficiencies and difficulties. They said that they felt that it would give us the one thing that would give us an advantage over totalitarian systems was this capacity for the free flow of information and a complete lack of control of debate, so that ideas that would eventually mature into policies would be annealed in a furnace of debate and then rise through the marketplace of ideas rather than being dictated from above. And that's what would give the energy, the vibrancy, the vigor to democracy. When they invented this democracy, we were the first one in the modern era in 1780. By 1865, 5 other nations had imitated us. Today, it's 190 nations based upon our system. We are supposed to be the exemplary democracy, and the corner foundation stone of our system is freedom of speech. All of the other freedoms depend on it. If we lose that, not only do we lose our democracy in this country, but the entire world loses us as an example.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. Now I recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman, say a request.
Ask for unanimous consent to enter the record an article by the New York Times on July the 20th, 2023. New York Post published Hunter Biden report amid newsroom doubts. Ask for unanimous consent.
Without objection. Some things amaze me. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized, and this will be our last line of questioning.
One of the immutable and undeniable tenets of immunology is natural immunity. But for 2 years, it was denied. It wasn't even just denied, it was censored. Mr. Sauer, I noticed in the court ruling, in the case that you worked on, that they said that, the court said that Facebook reported to the White House that it labeled and demoted posts suggesting natural immunity to a COVID-19 infection is superior to vaccine immunity. Is that true? Was that kind of censorship going on?
Yes, that kind of censorship was going on, and there were direct communications between the platforms and federal officials about natural immunity specifically that I think you've correctly quoted.
And thanks to the Twitter files, we found out that the former FDA director who was on the board of Pfizer, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, wrote on August 27th, 2021 to Twitter executive Todd O'Boyle, who, by the way, was kind of one of the go-to people for the White House also to coordinate with when they wanted something suppressed, requested Twitter take action against a post about natural immunity. You know what's amazing to me is Scott Gottlieb, who works for Pfizer, who's a former FDA director, went to Twitter the day I got censored on natural immunity, my post, a congressional post. Now, the other side said, well, your tweet's still up, your post is still up. What do you mean you're getting censored? What they did is they labeled it and they denied anybody's ability to actually comment on it, and they deboosted it. So I simply said natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity. We had studies showing that. They took it, they censored it. So the next day I tried it again with a reference to Bloomberg, hardly a right-wing outlet or conspiracy generator, and they censored that one as well. This is astounding to me. Mr. Kennedy, can you talk about the censorship, the effort of the White House and pharma to suppress the acknowledgement of natural immunity and why they might have been doing that?
Well, again, there was an effort to suppress information, not, in fact, if you read the Twitter files and the email correspondence between Facebook and the White House, there was an acknowledgement that they were being asked and they were complying with censoring information that everybody knew to be true or highly likely to be true. The purpose, and in fact, the term misinformation did not denote falsehood or veracity. Rather, it was a euphemism for any information that departed from government orthodoxies. And it is very dangerous. And, the congressman a minute ago said 1 million people have died because of misinformation about vaccines in this country. But in fact, our country had one of the highest vaccination rates in the world and the worst health outcomes. We have 4.2% of the global population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. Blacks in Haiti with a 1% vaccination rate were dying at a rate of 15 per million population. And same in Nigeria, had a 1.3 vaccination rate. They were dying at 1 in 14 per million population, 14 per million population. In our country, blacks were dying at 3,000 per million population, 200 times the death rates in other countries. And this holds throughout the world. We needed information. We should have all been sharing information openly and talking to the 15 million doctors through the internet who were treating patients on the front line all over the world and channeling the best therapies, the most successful treatments, so that we can all figure it out. This is not a time in a pandemic I'll just say this one thing. Trusting the experts is not a function of science. It's not a function of democracy. It's a function of religion and totalitarianism, and it does not make for a healthier population.
Let me ask you this. You referenced your father and your uncle and the party that they were in. What has happened to your party with respect to the First Amendment? Would they recognize the position now?
I think, listen, I'm a Democrat, and I believe in if you went through a checklist of all of the things that my father believed in, that he fought for, that my uncle believed in and fought for, I would check every box. I feel my party has departed from some of those core values, and one of the reasons that I want to run for president is to reclaim my party for those. But it's got to, listen, this is not a partisan issue. The First Amendment, it just seems crazy to me that anybody thinks that it's okay to censor, and there's a lot of information that I don't like. There's hateful information, but as the chairman was saying, in 1977, the ACLU went out and supported Nazis who were walking through a Jewish neighborhood in Skokie, Illinois. And they said, that's important. We hate what they're saying. We're repulsed by it. But we cannot survive as a democracy if we are not ready to die for the right for even people who are appalling to speak. The democracy won't work. Unfortunately, there's no other way to control it but through the First Amendment and free speech.
Amen, and thank you for those comments.
The time of the gentleman has expired. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. We appreciate the work you're doing to defend the First Amendment, and thank you for just very compelling answers and compelling testimony and the work you've done and how important this is for the country. I mean, if we don't have a First Amendment, it's just, I'm frightened by where we go.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
You may not.
I just want to respond.
Mr. Chair, the time is out. We're done.
I haven't adjourned the hearing, and I don't think you're the chair.
Mr. Chair,
Chairman's discretion.
I know it's your discretion,
We're going
but
to let Mr. Kennedy.
he has had so much additional time.
Well, I think everyone's had additional time. and
Why?
we're gonna
Why are you doing that specifically for him?
Because
I
we
just
don't
want to
opposed to other
explain
people.
I'm sure the witness,
super PAC.
I'm sure the Democratic
other
witness will be
places.
as short as he possibly can.
No. Are you going to allow our witness to just give another piece?
No, let him address the defamatory comment that was made about him. That's untrue.
That was not defamatory. That is a legal definition that was not met.
I want to acknowledge information about the super PAC that you mentioned.
Go ahead.
I've just been told that super PAC is connected to somebody that we have a connection to. It's not a super PAC that I've endorsed, and it's not one, as I said, that I've ever heard of.
Thank the gentleman for that statement, and I thank you for your testimony. The committee is now adjourned.